up or nod if that's the case. Okay. I'd like to echo and reinforce the land acknowledgement that Harvey has provided. It's very important to think about this, especially in the context of some of the materials and thoughts that Nitasha Sharma will be sharing with us today about questions of indigeneity and its intersection with Blackness and Asian American studies. I'd like to thank our hosts at East Wind Books, Bea, Harvey, and Kat, as well as the rest of the East Wind staff. They've supported Asian American studies in the community in Berkeley and the Bay Area for, as Harvey mentioned, decades, since a year after I was born. So I know that times are tough, but if you can, please make sure to check out the books on offer by East Wind and order them for curbside pickup or delivery. So these include the books that Nitasha will be talking about today, but also a wide variety of well-curated books for purchase in your consideration. I'd also like to extend my thanks to my students and the folks in English 53, Asian American Literatures and Cultures. Many of the questions in the early part of the Q&A session will be based upon student questions generated to discussion posts to Professor Sharma's work. The format of today's session is that I'll introduce our speaker, Professor Nitasha Sharma. Professor Sharma will then present for about 15 minutes, and then we'll segue into a question and answer session. So please feel free to add questions for Professor Sharma into the chat during her opening presentation or at any time in the Q&A discussion. I can read your question or relay it, or I'll call on you to deliver your question orally in Zoom. Just let me know what your preference is at the tail end of your question. So if you'd like me to read your question, say that. If you'd like to deliver your question yourself, because that's also a wonderful way to make sure that we get different voices and perspectives in. Please also do that. I strongly encourage you to do that if you feel so inclined. Okay, Nitasha Sharma. Nitasha Sharma is an associate professor of African American Studies and Asian American Studies at Northwestern University, where she is director of the Asian American Studies program. She is the author of Hop Desis, South Asian Americans, Blackness, and a Global Race Consciousness, Duke University Press, 2010, and Hawaii is My Haven, Race and Indigeneity in the Black Pacific, Duke University Press, forthcoming August 2021. She attended University of California, Berkeley from 1998 to 2004 as a graduate student in ethnic studies through an intercampus exchange program from UC Santa Barbara, and was a fellow at the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. The Bay Area was a foundational site of her research for her first book on South Asian Americans. As a personal note, I'd like to say that Professor Sharma has been a very important colleague and mentor. When I was teaching at Northwestern, I could count on her to be very clear about the realities of being a junior faculty person, whereas other senior faculty would sometimes be nice, but maybe not all that straight or honest about what the actual conditions of work and expectations for tenure might have been. I was going to list her teaching awards and recognitions at Northwestern, but there's so many of them, and it's almost as if she's won a teaching award every single year that it's perhaps better just to say that she's a fantastic teacher and a recognized pedagogue who's developed a lot of innovative courses at Northwestern. She's extremely generous as a colleague and also very committed to service for the university community, the Association for Asian American Studies, and so on. So without further ado, I'd like to segue to Professor Sharma's presentation, in which she'll talk about her initial work for Hop Desis and continuities with that work, and her forthcoming book, Hawaii is My Haven. So let me turn it over to you, Nitasha.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Oh my God, it's so good to see you, even if it's on Zoom. So I don't know if I'm a good teacher, but I am definitely a very engaged speaker. So it's very strange to do it all on Zoom. Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay, cool. So what's gonna happen today is after I say some thanks, I'm gonna show you some slides and I'll share my screen and then we can open it up. But first, I really wanna say how excited I am. This doesn't replicate actually being in the Bay Area. Some of my best years were really living on the Berkeley-Oakland border and walking up and down Telegraph and being in the ethnic studies department at Berkeley from 98 to 2004. I used to be a TA for Ron Takaki and for Evelyn Nakano Glenn, so I know fifth floor of Barrows Hall was really a home for me. And I kind of can't believe that all of you here are on Zoom. And so thank you for being here. You can dip out anytime. It's still a flat screen to me. It's okay. So thank you first to Andrew Leong. He was a former colleague of mine at Northwestern, and we sorely miss him, and Berkeley is lucky to have him, but Berkeley has the best faculty and is the best university, so I understand that. I also want to say how honored I am to be hosted by Eastwind Books, to meet Harvey Dong and to be able to interact with Bea and Kat has been really kind of amazing. So it's wonderful to know people's work and then to actually meet them. So thank you, Eastwind Books. Thank you, Harvey, Bea and Kat. So I'm just going to start. I'll speak for about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll hand it over. I do want to say that I have geared this to the English 53 class. And so it's me speaking to an undergraduate class that's looking at Asian American studies. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll talk you through some of my work, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Again, thank you all so much. And can you all see? Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to start with the first book. So when I went to graduate school, I went to UC Berkeley because I was basically escaping and running away from anthropology department at UC Santa Barbara, where I actually got my PhD from. Berkeley was a home, and especially ethnic studies. And the Bay Area was really, as Andrew Leong said, foundational to this book here, Hop Desis. And it was basically me concerned about Asian anti-Black racism. And this is back in 1996, 1997, 1998. So this conversation about Asian-Black relations seems to be a new one. And I'm glad that a lot of students and young people and people who want to be politically aware are thinking about it now. But just to have us remember that Asian Americans have long been engaged with questions of political activism and progressiveness, and have questioned our relations with African Americans and hierarchies of race. And so I was really concerned about Asian anti-Black racism. And I wanted to look at instances in which we saw alliance formation. And today we might call it solidarity. So the book was really about South Asian American youth who were mostly in the Bay Area, but also Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, who were not just consumers of hip hop, but who actively produced it as rappers, as DJs, as B-boys, B-girls, things like that. And so the Bay Area was the site of my research for that first book. So I'm just gonna walk you through that as fast as I can. I do like to talk, so I'll try to get through quickly. So if those of you who came in here listened to the opening track that was played by Kat, she was playing a song by the middle group here, the Indian American hip hop group Karmasi. And actually sitting on the steps there in the middle here with the hat is a UC Berkeley alum. And so Berkeley was a really important place for people to learn about ethnic studies and to learn about what being Asian American meant in a racialized sense and what our relations are with African Americans. These are some of the folks who are featured in my book. I'm not going to play the whole video of the next thing, just a very quick snippet to give you a quick example about the two main themes that really animated my research. And I'm an ethnographer, so I spent a lot of time in hip hop clubs with these artists in their homes, in their cars, listening to their record collections. Well, it wasn't records, we listened to CDs and tapes back then. And you know, I wanted to find out what is it that South Asian Americans are finding through hip hop. And basically I find three things, right? One is that South Asian Americans look to hip hop as a way to racialize the Asian American experience. So back in the 1980s, 1990s, Asian American studies was really talking about Asian Americans as an ethnic, as a kind of composite of ethnicities, that we had cultural differences and that's what defined us. But these South Asian Americans were really thinking about how we're racialized as Asian. And that becomes more apparent after 9/11 when we become racialized, for those of us who are South Asian or quote Muslim looking, how it was really a racial project. Through hip hop, they really learned to translate Black power into brown pride. And it really provided sort of a counter-hegemonic narrative of belonging in the United States. And they used hip hop to form alliances with Black people. So on the one hand, I found that a lot of South Asian American hip hop artists used hip hop to speak to their own communities, their own South Asian communities, and to talk about culture and ethnicity, but also to awaken their families to questions of being in the United States. So really quick, here's an example by Carmacy, produced by Ruckus Avenue Records, which includes a member of who was a UC Berkeley graduate. I'm just gonna play really fast. The quality is terrible, so I do apologize about that.
Ai hai, sujale tayar, kasule tayna, chokri ne place, mare to America joche, ne millionaire toche, tevuche, tasu kase nekatayare, tane khamba nati pati.
The DJs out there will hate that I didn't fade out, but I just stopped it right there. What you're gonna notice is that it sort of has Indian sounding instruments, that they're rapping in Gujarati, and it's about blood brothers. It's about brother who is in India and one who moves to the United States, and it has these immigrant themes. So this is one way that I found that a lot of South Asian American hip hop artists were using hip hop and made it sort of their own by infusing it with Indian themes or Sri Lankan elements and speaking to their Pakistani or Bangladeshi or Sri Lankan or Indian family members about being in the United States as a US born person. There was another sort of pattern that I found, and that's what I would call racialized hip hop. And here's another example, another Bay Area Indian American. He went to Lowell High School. I don't know if you folks know Lowell High School in San Francisco. So here is a quick verse from Chi Malabar.
To you, we all the same. If you black, you so crack. If you brown, you down. Billings, Timmy McVeigh did the same shit. Yeah. Y'all killed them, but you ain't trampled the rights of them white civilians. Didn't harass them or ask them for passports, visas. Didn't freeze their assets, no search, no seizures, while Bush is up on stage.
Oops. So what you can notice there, right, is that it's sort of the sound is less identifiably Indian. And so these folks were really interested in kind of trying to have conversations with an appeal to members of the Black community. They were not trying to enact a form of Blackness or pretend that they were Black, like a lot of people in the academy seem to be doing who are not Black or Latino. But what they were doing was identifying as South Asian and identifying the things that racialized us as South Asians. So you can see here that they're talking about the way that Black people are racialized as criminals and drug users. And if you were brown, then you were racialized and criminalized as a potential terrorist. And so this is what I call sort of racialized hip hop. And again, I met these artists in the Bay Area when I was in Berkeley, and it was a very important and vibrant multicultural space. So Chi Malabar, who is on the cover of that book, who I just played you a little snippet of, comes up with this idea, this kind of concept of post 9/11 brown. And that kind of really makes us think, and we can think about in the Q&A, like what is the relationship of South Asians to Asian America? The Bay Area is incredibly multiracial, we know, but what do South Asian Americans consider themselves Asian American? I have the sense that maybe Andrew's class still is overwhelmingly East Asian, and South Asian American students, Indian American students don't really take Asian American studies that much. And I want to expand that to think about what about West Asians or Arab Americans, right? Are they taking our classes? What is the relationship? So Chi Malabar was talking about after 9/11, right? He talked about this concept of a post 9/11 brown, where being brown is a very post 9/11 thing. He said it's political. It's not the same as being Black. It's very distinct. He said people are embracing the idea of being brown at an intellectual level, at an artistic level. So another thing to think about that I'll just throw out there and then move on is what is the relationship between artistic expression and politics, right? And I think that's really critical now when we're trying to imagine other worlds, alternatives to capitalism, alternatives to police. And I think we can really look to artists. So that I know a lot of you will want to talk about that book, but I wanted to turn also to what I've been working on now, which is the edited volume that I finished in 2018 and now my new work. And it's really not so much about music, but even in the Pacific, you can see I have an arrow over here pointing at Hawaii, which is often not even on the map. So if you look at sort of maps of coronavirus in the United States, Hawaii and Alaska are sometimes not even on the map. So what's happening all the way right? In the middle, the quote, most isolated landmass on earth. And even there, you can see the influence of Black diasporic culture, where when you go to Hawaii, really the soundtrack to the islands is reggae in a lot of ways. So this will actually be the topic of a next book, which I haven't finished yet. And it sort of looks at the genealogy of Black music in the Hawaiian Islands with a focus on jazz, reggae, and hip hop. But I wanted to think about Hawaii now with regard to thinking not just my focus on Asian Black or South Asian Black relationalities and politics, but how that kind of expands in my new book that's coming out to thinking about Black, Asian, and Indigenous relations, specifically in the context of Hawaii. That would be Black folks, Asian Americans or Asian folks who live in Hawaii, and Native Hawaiians. So these are the islands of Hawaii, and you can see Honolulu is there on Oahu. It's the capital city and the largest city. That's where I was born and raised. And so one thing I'll say to students, especially those who go to do their PhDs, is you want to do work, you can do work at home. And that was one thing that really was very difficult about anthropology, is they felt that my first book was too close to home. I was studying my own community, even though I didn't grow up with South Asian Americans in Hawaii. And the other thing is they thought it was too political. But in fact, those projects that have most kind of been throughout my career for 10 years each have been those that study my own community or my own home. So this project took me back home to Hawaii. This project is about Hawaii is My Haven is an ethnography of Black people in the Hawaiian Islands. And so a lot of it is really trying to do three things. So one is that I want to expand the focus of African-American studies and African diaspora from looking at the Black Atlantic to thinking about what is it that the Pacific offers people of of African descent. What is the Black Pacific? The second thing is that I want to look at multiracial folks. And Hawaii is often seen as a site of exceptional multiracialism and racial harmony. But what happens when we shift our view of mixed race people from being part white to looking at people who aren't white? So my research really focused on people who are Black and Hawaiian, Black and Korean, Black and Okinawan. And so these are the two questions, not three questions. One is, what does the Pacific offer people of African descent? And the second is, what do people of African descent bring to the Hawaiian Islands? And so very quickly, what I do is I look at, over the last 10 years, I spent 10 years on and off with people in Hawaii and interviewed 60 people and spent many, many hours and days with people. And it's basically based on two groups. One is Black locals, or people who are born and raised in the islands who have a Black parent or two Black parents. And the other group are Black transplants to the Hawaiian Islands. So these are people from the continental United States, and then a fewer from the Caribbean and Africa who go to Hawaii as adults. And I don't look at people who are in the military. I specifically want to look at what is the experience and documenting the experience of Black people in the Hawaiian Islands who are civilians and not part of the military. So one thing, and I'll rush through this because I know I do talk a lot. I want to talk just through this book really quickly in terms of how Hawaii is a site of several things that I want to talk about. So one is that Black people are almost never considered in the Hawaiian Islands. If you look at the histories of Hawaii, if you look at recent scholarship on Hawaii, people are not, for the most part, are not speaking about the presence of actual Black people. And if so, it's usually about the military in World War II. But it is a historic site of the presence of Black folks. In 1959, which is not this picture, this is not a picture from 1959, but Martin Luther King Jr. visited the Hawaiian Islands in 1959, and he gave a speech, and he said, 1959 was also the year of Hawaii's statehood. He said, "I come to you with a great deal of appreciation, I should say, for what has been accomplished in this beautiful setting and in this beautiful state of our union in the area of racial harmony and racial justice." So we know that combined with Hawaii as an exceptional site of sort of multiracialism and multiracial tolerance, that it is that idea has really twinned with the tourism industry. So we think of Hawaii, right, as a site of tourist pleasure, as a playground for folks. But in fact, some people were not necessarily happy or down with statehood. And especially if you go back, 60 years from that with annexation, a lot of people in Hawaii were not in favor of becoming part of the United States. So I'm putting this tension here, but I also want to highlight that, in fact, Black people have been coming to the island since the end of the 1700s. So here we have an example of Betsy Stockton. She's the first documented Black woman who was in the Hawaiian Islands in 1823. It's possible that there were Black women before that. She was gifted as an enslaved woman to the president of Princeton. Upon her being granted her freedom, she sailed across the ocean with friends of the president of Princeton to be a missionary and helped founded a school for Hawaiians on Maui. So a formerly enslaved woman became fluent in Hawaiian, and she founded this school and met the queen at the time. And so I want to say that this is really sort of where part of this long legacy is where the book's title comes from, right? Hawaii is my haven. That's a quote that comes from a Black nurse from Mississippi who has lived in Hawaii for a long time. She said, Hawaii is my haven. And I really want to chart out the very long presence of Black people in the Hawaiian Islands that we in Hawaii often do not even acknowledge. Whalers came and individuals came like Anthony Allen. And so it was not just World War II and the arrival of soldiers, but throughout this history of 250 years, Black people have continued to find Hawaii as an exceptional site where they could flee the racist bonds of slavery and also Jim Crow segregation to find a haven. So I want to note Hawaii as a site of Black presence. The other thing, though, is that what Black folks who come from elsewhere, who come to the islands bring, is really a racial lens of highlighting Hawaii as a site of anti-Black racism. And this is also something that we generally don't have the vocabulary for, at least as a public school girl growing up in Hawaii. And I should say my mom is Russian Jewish from Brooklyn, so she's white, and my dad is from India, so I'm white and Indian. I'm not Black and I'm not Hawaiian. So I want to say that what Black folks really highlight who come there after having been raised in predominantly Black neighborhoods and communities or in white suburban areas across the United States is that they really highlight that there is anti-Black racism in Hawaii. And this is not a vocabulary that is the primary vocabulary in the islands. So even the monarch, so Queen Liliuokalani, she was racialized as Black. She had been called, quote, a pickaninny, and they tried to sort of, quote, Africanize and discredit the queen and the other monarchs as having African descent. And so there's a long legacy of this transferability of the denigration of Blackness onto Native Hawaiians, at the same time that Native Hawaiians within the Pacific are considered more white than, say, Melanesians or Micronesians. This is not a thing of the past. In 2016, Cedric Gates was running for, as the youngest, I believe, House of Representatives. He was running for that in Waianae. And there was his campaign poster here was defaced, you can see, with the no N-word on it. And so even in the Hawaiian Islands, and this is just a few years ago, right? You can see that there's specifically and targeted, not just racism, but anti-Black racism, right? And in response, Cedric Gates wrote on his Facebook to his community, not only am I a proud African-American, I am a proud Afakasi as well. Half Polynesian or Samoan is his background, and half African-American ethnicity. Community member born and raised in Waianae. So he did win, but I do want to mark, right, both that from a continental view, we might read Cedric Gates as being Black, especially given the racial epithet that's scrawled there, but also that he is Black and Samoan, and that really comments on his local roots. So anti-Black racism exists in the island. The third thing I want to mention is that Hawaii is a site of military occupation, and to many or some on the islands, Hawaii is not a US state. It is a colony of the United States, and it is part of the military occupation of the US empire. And President Cleveland admitted back in the, that Hawaii had been illegally annexed to Hawaii. And so, and that the Queen's power should have been, she was illegally usurped. And so I want us to understand that in Hawaii, there are many, many views of Hawaii's status, and one discourse and one argument, one line of thinking with much evidence behind it is it's a site of military occupation, right? And so tourism and the military, or militarism, as Teresia Teaiva and Bernadette Gonzalez say, militarism, military and tourism are the two primary economic engines in Hawaii, right? The first and second largest financially. And these are the two vehicles through which a lot of African Americans arrive in the islands, either as tourists, right, or as members of the US military. And so what you have is in the continental US, the root.com in 2014, it's a Black publication, was talking about how the military is one of the most desegregated places, which is interesting given sort of the history of segregated troops, right? And that through the military, African Americans could achieve some upward mobility, access to home loans, access to college, and also access to some forms of citizenship. And so according to some people, the military is praised as an avenue for advancement, especially and particularly in light of systemic racism that shuts off other opportunities for African Americans. So I'm not downplaying either the racism that Black folks are facing in the US military. But what does this mean, right? On the other hand, in the same year, the Root also said that Hawaii was the #1 best place, the best state for Black people in the United States. And a lot of that had to do with its multiracialism, but specifically because Black people in Hawaii earned the highest income at $66,000 that year compared to elsewhere across the United States. So there's this idea, right? But the reality for folks who are living in the islands, and particularly Native Hawaiians, so Native Hawaiians are people who are indigenous to Hawaii, is that you can see this is the main island of Oahu. Honolulu's on the bottom, the south. 25% of Oahu is owned by the military. Native Hawaiians do not have access to their own lands, right? And so I think that these are all military, you can see all of these complexes. And so it is the gateway to the Pacific. It is central to national security, but it is a colonized place, right, of settler colonialism, which means that settlers came and colonized to disappear the Native Hawaiian. So what does that mean with regard to who is the settler? In the continental US, we think about settler colonialism often through the idea that white people are settlers and Native communities are Native. And there's been increasing conversation about the role of formerly enslaved Black people or members of the African diaspora. Where do they sit in the Native settler divide? There's a lot of questions about that. In Hawaii, it really disrupts the idea of white and Native because it's really a site of Asian settler colonialism. Hawaii has a long plantation history, which brought exploited Asian laborers from Japan, Korea, the Philippines, but Asians have gone on since statehood to become, particularly Chinese and Japanese, to be very powerful economically and politically. So they are advancing, right, the settler state. They are the settler state. So here you can see, and Andrew, I promise I'm almost done. Here you can see the breakdown. I think this is a 2010 breakdown. Don't stare too much, but you can see that, you know, in Hawaii, we say there, John Okamura has written an article that was very excellent saying why there are no Asian Americans in Hawaii. And that's because your particular ethnic group really matters. The experiences of Filipinos, very different with regard to political power, economic power, access to resources, very different from Chinese or Japanese, right? Or Vietnamese. So if you add though all of the Asian groups together on this list, you can see that it is a majority Asian place, right? And you can see that Black folks there are about 3% today of the Hawaii population. And so I want us to think about Hawaii as it can contribute to discourses of settler colonialism, which a lot of scholars have talked about. Haunani K. Trask, Candace Fujikane, Noelani Goodyear Ka'opua. So many people are speaking about this, but what is our accountability and complicity in these structures of domination that shape our relationships to African Americans and to Indigenous people, right? So here's just a really quick example of this. So here, the University of Hawaii, and I underline the key figures, the University of Hawaii, the president, this is not the picture of the president, the UH president is David Lassner, who's a white man, is thanking Senator Mazie Hirono, who usually I love. She's a local Asian woman, and Brian Schatz. Those are two, those are two senators. they're very thankful that they brought a collaboration between the University of Hawaii and the ROTC program. So they're further militarizing, right, the Hawaii for economic and quote unquote national security reasons, right? And so they're bringing this Black man who's here, officer and professor of naval science, Donald Nisbet, to the University of Hawaii. And what you see in these sort of decision makers that are kind of advocating for increased military relationships, economic relationships, political relationships, and educational relationships, there are not Hawaiians listed here, right? The people who are making these ideas about and these effects, right, are not including the voices of Hawaiians and what this means, what increasing ties to the ROTC, increasing ties to militarism means. And I just have 2 more sites and then I'll open it up. I want us to think about Hawaii as a site of multiracialism. You know, Hawaii has often been viewed as a multiracial paradise, meaning of many different races, but Hawaii also is, of course, a site of a huge number or proportion of people who identify with more than one race or multiracials like myself. So about a quarter of the population, I hope I have that right, a fifth or a quarter of the population on the census would mark more than one racial category. And this is where I think that this project also has us think about who is Asian America. And so many of the folks who were in that list of demographics identify as white and Japanese, as Chinese and Puerto Rican, right? But I want to shift our ideas of mixed race debates and discussions of multiracialism as a racist project or who is mixed race. I want to shift, Hawaii shifts our expectations that that means Black, white, or Asian and white, to thinking about dual minority biracials. And so this is, you don't have to stare at this too much, it's terribly small. This is just an example of some of the folks that I spoke to, right? Who I didn't look at people who are Asian and who are Black and white. I interviewed 60 people of African descent. Many of them, 14 of the 19 from Hawaii, were multiracial with Black fathers, some also with Black mothers, but also mostly with Asian, Hawaiian, and Samoan mothers. But I'm just showing you that there are people in Hawaii who we may consider Asian or we may consider Black, who are here, Black Japanese, Black Korean, Black Okinawan, Black Filipina. And in all these cases, you'll notice that with one exception, their fathers are Black and their mothers are Asian from Asia or from Hawaii. So I want us to think about what does it do to expand our ideas about multiracialism and also Blackness. Before ending, I'll also say that I want to show you how these folks that I talked to who are Black and Asian, how do they describe themselves? A woman whose mom was Japanese and whose dad was African-American in Hawaii said, I don't identify as local because we come from Japan. I'm both Black and Japanese. A woman who had a Korean mom and an African-American, American Indian, English, and Irish father said, I'm part Black, I'm just me. I'm not more African-American, I'm more Korean. A person whose mother was Black Chinese and whose father was Okinawan said, I knew I was Black and I knew I looked different, but I still thought of myself as a little Asian girl. I was just Okinawan. And one last example, a woman whose mother is Filipino and whose dad she describes as Black say, I say Black Filipino, Malaysian if I'm feeling funny. What I want you to note, and if we were in a class, I'd pause and ask you, is I think you'll be surprised that the one drop rule is not in operation here. Nobody here said, obviously I'm Black. Many folks here in Hawaii, I'm not in Hawaii, but many folks in Hawaii really are identifying, right, as Black and I want us to think about what that means, right, with regard to the presence of Black Asians, but also the idea of the one drop rule. And lastly, I'll say that it's a site of Black, Native, and Asian exchange. And these are political exchanges, historical exchanges, and then of course, some of the folks that I look at who are all of these things they embody these multiple ancestries, right? So Haunani K. Trask is a very critical and foundational Hawaiian sovereignty leader and professor, Hawaiian professor. And she went to graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. And she learned a lot of her politics were framed from her reading of Frantz Fanon and Malcolm X. And she says, when I was an undergrad and graduate student at the University of Wisconsin, from the late 1960s through the 70s, the Vietnam War focused a great deal of our organizing and protest. The Black civil rights movement came also to define our resistance, as did one of its offshoots, the Fight for a Black Studies program. And she was, I believe, the first tenured Hawaiian professor at the University of Hawaii. So I want us to think about these political conversations that are not new among Indigenous, Black, and Asian folks, right? She's talking about the 60s. And of course, we could go back centuries to these conversations. A member of a Black queer women's collective in Hawaii who is Black and Mexican, who has lived in Hawaii for a long time, says, "I don't understand how you cannot see the connections between minority struggles anywhere. I think part of the reason is that it happens here, especially, is this weird resentment that Hawaiian sovereignty and local native rights movements have. There's this weird competition with other liberation movements, and Black liberation movements are seen as this monolithic American tradition almost. We've been fighting for it forever. I think that there's this weird competition where it's not about Black Lives Matter here. It's about Polynesian Lives Matter. It's about Hawaiian sovereignty, and go do that shit on the mainland." Now, I raise this because it's not all kumbaya. There have been recent tensions that a lot of interlocutors in this project have highlighted, where there's enormous Hawaiian activism that is critically important, especially on Mauna Kea, against the construction of a 30-meter telescope. And it has really brought to a head the resurgence of Hawaiian cultural practices, relations to land, and fights against settler colonialism. But this has really coincided this last summer, as you know, with many of the protests across the world, including in Hawaii, for Black Lives Matter and against police brutality. But a lot of, some folks in Hawaii who are Black have said people didn't realize we lived here. And they're also saying that some people who are fighting for Hawaiian sovereignty or Hawaiian activism are saying that Black people's issues are not relevant here. That stuff is a mainland issue. It's a continental US issue. We don't have Black people. We don't have race. We don't have racism. The priority is Hawaiian issues. And so these things have come to a head, but I suggest in the book that they're actually, both things have to go hand in hand, of course, decolonization and anti-racism. So just to end here, I believe Cedric Gates, as you know, who I mentioned before, became in the House of Representatives. He's Black and Samoan from Waianae, which is a heavily Samoan, a Hawaiian neighborhood or district on Oahu. He helped to coordinate a Black Lives Matter event and brought out Patrice Kahn Cullors, who is one of the co-founders of the National Black Lives Matter movement. And she's gone to Hawaii several times and has learned a lot about the experiences of Black residents of Hawaii, and especially Black Hawaiians. And more recently, Elisa Garza, and the co-founder also of Black Lives Matter, also gave a lecture through the University of Hawaii. Ta-Nehisi Coates was also hosted by the Popolo Project. So these conversations are kind of emerging, and I think that it's a really critical place to look at the relationships of not just Black and Indigenous relationality, but where are Asian Americans and our political sort of activism and roots within that conversation. So I know I spoke for a long time. I'm gonna end my share screen and hope that someone's still there, because I'm speaking to a blank screen. And see what's happening. All right, Andrew, sorry, that was like twice as long.
No, but it's super rich. There's tons of material to talk about. And I really hope that folks can take a little bit of a breath here. Start typing in your questions into chat. They don't have to be fully formed yet, just partial things, but please do so, because I don't want to be the only one talking to Nitasha, amazing as that is. All right, so one place to start might just be a clarifying question. So at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about trying to flee from anthropology. You also identified yourself as an ethnographer. That seems to have some overlap with your interests in talking about identifications beyond ethnicity, and the term that you used was racialization. So could you maybe put those two parts together? Like, what is ethnography? What are some issues that anthropology has had in the past with ethnography as a method? And what does that mean in terms of academic use of the terms ethnicity and racialization?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think about this a lot. And I mean, I've been very fortunate to find a home in ethnic studies, and it was specifically the comparative ethnic studies department at Berkeley where I found a home. And had I not gone there and not met Victoria Robinson and Ronald Takaki and Michael Omi and Evelyn Nakano Glenn, if I had not met them and people in the Black and African Diaspora Studies department, I don't know if I'd be a scholar at this point. So anthropology to me it's a colonial discipline. Not to me, it is a colonial discipline. And so it has particular roots in a colonizing kind of mission, which is to know the other means to possess the other. So part of colonialism was really about constructing the other, making them distant from ourselves and defining ourselves through the other. So that sounds really old school, like, okay, colonization of Asia and Africa a long time ago. But within my own department at Santa Barbara, you know, they said, you're studying your own community. You can't do that. It's too close. And they also said, you're not leaving the United States. You have to go there. And then they also said, you can't study hip hop. It's too political. Now, these are the three foundational things really that like ethnic studies was founded on. It is about that knowledge is political. And it is about studying our own communities because otherwise they're not talked about. And it's about, there is no objective science, right? Everything is subjective. And so I think that ethnic studies, which rose from student strikes in 1968 from San Francisco, and then also 69 at UC Berkeley, really is sort of the antithesis, the counter to area studies and anthropologies, which are colonial disciplines. Ethnic studies is really highlighting race, and it has its own limitations, but it really highlights race instead of culture. Anthro is about culture and the other and difference. Now, all of that said, and I think knowledge is political, all of that said, that's why I introduced myself as an ethnographer, because I still swear by and am defined by and find a lot of comfort and meaning in the ethnographic method. So what I mean by that is I don't do literary analysis so much. I am not doing broad scale surveys. I'm hanging out with a community of people, and I spend a lot of time with them, in both cases like 10 years, right? And interviews and ethnographic vignettes and really a grounded material, like a grounded reality. And that's where the theories come from. Whereas now I'm reading a lot of things about Black and Native studies. And then when I actually hang out with people who are Black folks in relation to Native Hawaiians or Black Hawaiians, the theories don't bear out. They offer different theories. So that's really the approach, I think, between the fields and also the method.
Okay. I want to maybe draw on a student question here that I think is connected. Andrew Senkamyang, are you on the line? And you had a question in your discussion post about precisely these ethnographic methods. Do you feel comfortable relaying that question?
Is it Andrew? Come on. Who did you say? What was the name?
Senkamyang.
Come on, Senkamyang. Let's hear it.
Andrew Senkamyang, yeah.
Okay, Andrew.
If not, okay. Might not be the case that he can chat directly. I'll just read the question then. Because of Sharma's ability to maintain good relations with her subjects during the study and even after, here talking about Hop Desis, but I think this connects to Hawaii is My Haven. I think this was advantageous in truly being able to understand their perspectives on racialization and cross-group interactions. But with such a large pool of interviewees and an immense amount of information, I'm wondering if there are ever instances of conflict or bias. To expand, here quoting you, it also allows anthropologists to weigh people's words with their lifestyles, end quote. This serves as one of the benefits to the work, but in doing so, couldn't this also be a driving factor for cultural bias? In essence, how did you maintain the integrity of ethnographic methodology without introducing cultural bias and still develop a personal relationship with those that you interviewed?
Oh, that's such a great question. The Andrews ask such great questions. Cultural bias. I mean, so everybody who's doing any kind of research, no matter what, we all have our set positionalities and our set realms of knowledge, and that's how we're going to approach our material. So everybody is coming from a particular standpoint, right? And so my concern is not so much about cultural bias. It's about, you know, the part of Hop Desis, and I'm kind of tickled or pleased because I think one of the MCs that I told you about in the beginning, who was a graduate of UC Berkeley, I think he's on this call. Kieran, what's up? So yes, it's decades later, and I still have relations with them. And thanks to social media, it really changed for the second project where I could really maintain relationships. Really it's not so much about social bias for me as it is about, I guess it's like ethically, it was really hard because the first book was about artists, and artists like politicians, if you're going to talk about their lyrics or analyze them, they're not anonymous anymore. And so I went from using only pseudonyms in the first book to, before it got published, it didn't make sense. I had to say their actual names and then tell their stories. And sometimes they might have said things that were fucked up, or like their politics I didn't like, or maybe they did funky things. And so the question as an ethnographer or a scholar is, do you add that in? Does it help or advance do we need to know that? So that is one thing that was really tricky, is I felt like I was being critical of South Asians, particularly about our aunties and uncles and their anti-Black racism. But I had to do that. So it was kind of feeling icky. So again, I'm kind of being like a politician and not answering your question. But for me, it's not about social bias or cultural bias, because whether something's far different from us or far at home, we're going to bring some sort of relationality to that. So for instance, Hawaii is home, and that can be really great. It means that I understand references. I know where to meet. I know what things mean. I know how to show up. But on the other hand, I might not have been so careful about like explaining things in my writing to people who are not familiar with Hawaii, right? So that's the thing. But either way, you lose out. So I think that that's a really great question. And I would just say that whether we're really close to something or really far from something, no matter what, we're going to have a distance or closeness to it. And it's just how we handle it. And I also think it's okay if we're not completely, if we don't get it right all the time, as long as that ethical push and that true adherence to what you're finding in people's lives is really held through. That's a really excellent question.
So I think another question that stems from thinking about who you're interviewing or what factors come up in interviews might come from Brianne Amada, who says that they can read their question out loud. So Brianne, please feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, hello. I'll turn my video on too. And also, hey, Harvey and Bee. I'm a former Eastwind staff, and it was great that this event was made open to the public. So I'm actually joining from Central Oahu. I just moved back home, and I guess there's there's a lot of context I could give, but I guess I'll just say my family roots kind of do fall into that Asian settler colonial category. And now I actually work on the Waianae Coast with mostly Native Hawaiian youth. And so I guess in your analysis, Dr. Sharma, I was wondering if you interviewed anyone, I guess when I say youth, I mean maybe under the age of 30 or so, and just was age an aspect of your analysis, and were there any kind of findings related to that? So yeah, thanks for taking my question.
Thank you so much for that. Oh my goodness. I'm teaching a class right now. I'm still in Chicago, but one of my students is in IAEA, and I'm from Manoa, just to let you know. Yeah, I mean, like I said, so I'm 47, and I started this project at 37, 36, something like that, 10 years ago. And I interviewed people who are my age, much, much older. The oldest was 85-year-old person who had come through the US Navy. And then I interviewed a bunch of people who were younger, in their 20s and 30s. But I wouldn't interview people under 18 because of human subjects stuff. So yeah, I did. I interviewed youth. I interviewed a lot of 30-year-old somethings, right? 30-something-year-olds, and a fewer 50-year-olds. So nobody really young, but I would say that age is really important in terms of most of the people who were older had 2 Black parents, if that makes sense. And most of the people who were younger were sort of the children of Asian moms, sometimes who had met their Black military husbands in Japan or Korea or what have you, right? And so also included was a number of Black Hawaiians who were raised on homestead land. Not all of them were raised on Hawaiian homestead land, but that included Nanakuli and then also Papakolea. So people were sort of spread across Oahu, and that really affected the experiences they had. And with one exception, again, you know, nobody grew up with their Black fathers, with one exception. And so what does it mean to be raised Hawaiian, where in Hawaiian communities where you know you're Hawaiian, right? And you're accepted as Hawaiian, but unlike their, you know, Hapahauli cousins who are white and Hawaiian, or white Chinese and Hawaiian, they would be specifically denigrated as they grew up with the N-word, with a lot of sort of anti-Black racism from their families. And Black Asians as well, from their Asian families, a lot of espousal of anti-Blacks, like specifically anti-Black racism that they grew up with. And the hard thing that I really, you know, noticed was that for a lot of these folks who are not growing up in a Black metropolis, there's not a large Black community outside of the military or Black churches or Waikiki. A lot of people, and in K through 12, we don't learn a lot about, right, African-American history. So what does it mean to face anti-Black racism in a context where you can't go home to a family member to kind of explain it to you? So one example is a Black Hawaiian who said he wasn't, you know, his mom wasn't with his father, who was Black, and the mom was Hawaiian. She remarried a Black man. And then when his stepfather found out that this child had never heard of Martin Luther King Jr. And so he would send him to go do reports. So again, a lot of it is, you know, it's not about sort of the specificity of anti-Black racism in Hawaiian communities. Asian folks would not let their Black, their children's Black friends come to their homes. So what does that mean for someone who is Black Samoan or Black Japanese? A lot of Japanese teachers in Hawaii were particularly anti-Black toward these Black children. And again, Black children meaning including Black Okinawans, Black Samoans, Black Hawaiians. So I think that that's something that I really hope to address is Asians' anti-Black racism, and also the anti-Black racism faced by Black Hawaiians who from their Hawaiian community members, right? It's a global issue. So that in terms of the youth is very specific from the kinds of racism that Black transplants faced who came as adults for jobs at the University of Hawaii or in the medical field or as entrepreneurs. These folks had a much more certain identity and identification as Black because they grew up in Black communities on the continental US from Carson, California, or upstate New York, which was more white. They came and they really waged a number of lawsuits and would talk about racism, not growing up or being called the N-word, which definitely they had experienced elsewhere, but through workplace discrimination. And so lawsuits by Black teachers, lawsuits by Black nurses, these kinds of things. So articulating anti-Black racism, but for locals who grew up as children, it was really being called by within their communities, their Asian and Polynesian communities being called epithets and being you know, harassed in that way. Thank you, Brianne.
So maybe a follow-up to that question in terms of thinking about age and the differential experiences across different segments of your interview population that way. Another thing that came up in your presentation was the deliberate choice not to interview people that were directly associated with the military in Hawaii. Can you elaborate a little bit more on your reasoning for doing this and what the focus on civilian populations did for your research?
Yeah, thank you for that, Andrew. Part of it is that so much of the work, of the little work that's been done on the experience of Black people across the Pacific or in Oceania has really been limited to a military history on the one hand, which really kind of, it's not a contemporary ethnography or idea of we don't have a sense of what Black life in the Pacific looks like, right? It's about military histories. The second kind of way that Blackness has been kind of analyzed in scholarly work now also is about the movement and circulation of Black musical forms and Black political ideologies. So the embrace, understandably, of Black power ideologies and movements, the relationships and exchanges of the Polynesian Panthers and the Black Panthers, of people in the Pacific who identify as Black, including Maori and other folks, right? But I really wanted to focus on what Black civilian life looked like as a counter or as a way to expand the focus on the military. But secondly, I'm housed in Black studies, and I really wanted to engage this question of, I've long engaged the question of Asian American accountability for anti-Black racism. Like, that's really motivating for me. I also, am expanding to think not just about Black Asian relations, but also Black Indigenous Asian relations. And so, I decenter whiteness in all of my work. I teach classes, as you know, on Asian Black relations. I'm teaching a class now on Black studies, Native studies, Asian settler colonialism. I'm not talking about Black Hawaiian, Black white, or Asian white, although white supremacy forms it. So what I'm interested in engaging here also is this question of Black abjection, or a lack of agency and accountability. When we look at the US continental context, I think it's quite clear that we can't simply shove African Americans under the umbrella of settler because of enslavement, right? And because of the dynamics of the afterlives of slavery. But in the Pacific, yes, these are still members of the African diaspora, many of whom are the ancestors of enslaved people. But there is agency that takes people who are not in the military across the Pacific to find a haven in Hawaii. So if we can say that there's Asian settler colonialism, what does it mean for Black professionals across the continental US, including some folks from the Caribbean and Africa, to, as middle-class people, because it's very expensive to move, go to the islands and take part in owning land that is Hawaiian land, right? And it's not to smush together, right, Black folks and Asian folks and the original colonizers of Hawaii all as the same. I have an issue with the native settler binary, and I have an issue with the Black-white binary. They're helpful, but I think it's more bifurcated. And so I'm very interested in the accountability and agency of Black people in the Pacific, who we can't simply discount. In Hawaii, it's so hegemonic to see a Black person and to say, oh, you must be military. So many of the Black locals who grew up were not just disparaged in their families, but were also presumed by people who didn't know them, oh, you here for the military. And so what does it mean to grow up to constantly be seen as part of the occupying force, or somebody who has money, or somebody who is not local? So I really wanted to expand on that really kind of untold narrative.
Thanks so much for that. Also a great explanation of what it is that ethnographic work can do in terms of like getting other stories told, and relaying that in book form. I wonder if there's a question from Adair Nguyen. Adair, are you able to provide speech, or if not, that's okay. I'll wait a sec for response. If not, I'm going to read a version of the question from the discussion post. Okay, so this one is about militarism and its association with maybe model minority professionalism myth. So here, Adair is asking, there's heightened militarism in Hawaii that leads many people to view non-military affiliated people as inferior, which perpetuates colonial ideas within Hawaii. This particularly interested me as I had never thought of militant colonialism as an effect on racial perception and inequality. As obviously colonialism is heavily influential in this regard, the idea of militarism as an influential factor I thought was a new argument I had never heard before. Sharma then continues with this sentiment to talk about masculinity in regards to militarism. This made me think about the Asian American male's experience in this country and how these two ideas either conflict or live in harmony. This reading led me to a final question on the relationship between the stereotypical Asian American model minority male and how this group's masculinity could be potentially affected by ideas of militarism or machoism, things like that.
Okay, so this question is an excellent question, and it's outside of my field and my research, but it has me thinking of a few things. So one of the things that I realized from when I made the PowerPoint was I was highlighting, right, like a site of, a site of, a site of, and I was talking about the specificity of place and how place has a history to it that informs dynamics. And that was related to, for instance, the thing that I mentioned about John Okumura, who says that there are no Asian Americans in Hawaii. Like if people were to define somebody, they'd say, oh, the Japanese guy over there, or the Filipino guy over there, right? It's not necessarily the Asian guy. And that has to do with the history of migration and the racialization of these various ethnic groups. So Filipino means something different in Hawaii than Japanese in Hawaii. So in that sense, I don't know, I'm sorry to say to your question, I don't know about Asian Americans in the military in the Hawaii context. I just know that I think that my book emphasizes, perhaps unfairly, a critique of militarism in Hawaii. So this is something that the Black folks in this project, which is the whole project, have to contend with, being seen as outsiders, which is very different from the site or the space of the continental US, where African Americans, people who are Black, are often assumed to be native born, meaning born in the United States. In Hawaii, if you're Black or white, you're often thought to be, oh, where are you from? So what does that mean to sort of a Black subjectivity? That is similarly when people ask Black folks, as they ask many people in Hawaii, not just what high school did you go to, but what are you? And so this old friend of mine who I've known for 35 years laughs because he said, when I met him, I asked him what he was, and he's a Black man from Louisiana, like unequivocally, apparently what we would obviously consider to be visually Black. And he laughed that I said that, what are you? And the thing is that, again, what does that mean to our presumptions of who people are? Okay, with regard to masculinity and Asian Americans and the US military, it's not my field. I'm so sorry, I can't answer you, but I do feel like there was a graduate from UC Berkeley who is specifically studying the 442nd and Asian Americans in military service who came from Hawaii and who were training in the US South. And so you should check him out. I can't remember the name. So I'm so sorry, it's a poor answer to your very good question. One part more of that, just to say, is that related to the specificity of Hawaii and the dominance of Asian Americans in political and economic power, and the different racialized masculinities of people in Hawaii, means that there is not just like the concept of Asian American male emasculation. It operates differently in the islands. There might be sort of a comparative or relational thing where Polynesians, including Samoans and Hawaiians, are racialized in ways that Black men are, as heightened with physicality or criminality or things like that, affiliated with the body. And Asian Americans might be affiliated more with having economic and political control and not so much with physicality of athletics or things like that. But I think that it's too diversified to say. So again, I think your question points to the question of where we're talking about. Thank you.
So one question that really brings up is this issue of where, and the issue of like political address and setting. So one thing that I was struck by, and this is maybe a way to talk about like the difference between doing work in the 2000s, 2010s, and the 2020s, is like our sense of where is really distorted by social media. And even the Zoom call is an instance of, you're in Chicago, I'm in San Francisco, folks are like scattered along the California coast and elsewhere, sometimes even in time zones in Asia. And so the question of like what a specific address or a specific statement means to one community is different when you're like posting something on Twitter. The example comes to mind is something like a slogan from the 1960s, early 1970s, like "Yellow Peril supports Black Power," was like a poster sign that made sense in the context of Third World Liberation Front strikes. But now, if you just issue it in social media to like a global audience, it could risk decentering Black Lives Matter messaging because it might get shared and disrupt that space. So how, as like an ethnographer, do you grapple with like really thinking about site-specific and local situations and contexts where your work and the statements of others might get translated in unpredictable ways outside of specific locations?
I mean, totally. I mean, a few things come to mind. One is like, that's part of like my anxiety of like having this talk be open to people, because I don't know who people are. I can't control my audience, right? And so I don't know if people are coming to listen to folks with sympathy or with you know, contestation. The other thing about site specific stuff that's kind of trippy these days is like people will say, oh, this talk is on Zoom at like 4 p.m. And you're like, 4 p.m. where? Like, is this East Coast? Is this West Coast? Is it Hawaii time? I have no idea. So I think that's a really great point. The other thing that this question makes me think about, and we've been talking about this in this grad class, is that it seems like this is not, this isn't to say that scholars don't do this, are not both all the time, but there is this debate about sort of levels of abstraction and universality in the way that we theorize things, like how do we come up with a theory out of our studies that makes sense and that's broadly applicable. And then folks who are like attuned to like the specific and the historical and the particular and like the lived everyday realities, the material realities, who can poke holes in those universals, right? But then what uses, like how broadly can we theorize about, say, 24 South Asian American hip hop artists in the 1990s to like the broader experience of Asian Americans? There actually is things you can say, and but you can't say everything. And what you can say is this is what I would say to students, is that whether you want to do political theory or whether you want to do literary analysis or whether you want to do an oral history of one person and write a book or 5,000 books about one person, which might seem crazy, but you know, George Washington was probably written about by 5,000 people, right? That's one person. So the thing is that if we read broadly and we keep our eyes open to what other scholars are doing and saying, and what activists are doing and saying, and what everyday people are doing and saying, then we're going to be able to couch our specifics into a broader conversation. And the other thing I want to say, and again, I'm not totally answering you, but I think it's really critical, like, you know, I've told my students this, Twitter has me scared. I'm on Twitter, but I'm not strong enough for Twitter. I'm not strong enough for the 90-day fiance. This stuff is too much. Okay, I try and I consider myself a badass, but Twitter's hard because, you know, and especially you see I have so many words, I can't say shit in like that many characters. And then what about this and what about that? So I think that that's one of the generational tussles that I have as a professor teaching things, is that, you know, we teach and we're in the academy and we like teach new classes, but our orientation is kind of developing and we read new things. But generationally, there's these like punctures. And so you notice things like when I email students these days, it's like screaming into the void. I have no idea if anyone's got my emails. And then I meet them in class and they're like, oh yeah, we got your emails. But people, when email etiquette started, always wrote back, got it, received, confirmed, thank you. You know, so again, kind of thinking about how we can do our research in whatever method, and that's a very specific thing. And especially for undergrads doing research projects or graduate students writing dissertations, we have to be focused or we are not going to do a good job. But it doesn't mean that we can't make big claims, but I think that we have to still do the research and do our homework. And you don't have to be in the academy to do that. Read books, right? Like take part in protest, like figure out what's happening, and then we can see what patterns there are. But I, for instance, like to really look at those unlikely encounters. So South Asian American hip hop artist was a very specific and unique thing, but I want to look at those things in the liminal spaces between the things that we already expect. So you look at Black Hawaiians in Hawaii, who a lot of people have not looked at or recognized, you're looking at people who are disrupting the concept that there are Black politics and there are Native politics, because they are bridging both of them. And they are being, so what happens when we look at those spaces? So you can look at something very specific and see how it kind of contributes and disrupts our expected categories and identities and ideas. Or you can come at it by looking at very broadly, but expect that people always be making kind of, well, what about this? What about that?
Yeah, so maybe one way of thinking about abstraction or universalization is maybe not the academic stuff, which is like super interesting to you and I, but maybe less interesting for most people in the class and the broader audience for this talk, which is what you do with the globalization of a media or a music form. So there are a couple of questions that have popped up in the chat about this. One is from Julianne Han, who's asked me to read one of the questions. So in the case of Desi hip hop, there's a claim that the rise of the genre has come from growing up with the influence of hip hop music and a desire to identify with the Black community due to similar struggles as minorities or maybe minoritized populations in America. However, is the adoption of hip hop an inherently African-American genre, rich with cultural and historical significance in our, meaning Asian peoples or South Asian peoples, rights, even as another minority group? Are there the standards for this different now, I guess in the 2020s, now that hip hop is branched out like you see it in K-pop everywhere, as more of an international genre, despite its roots?
This question, and I'm this might not be what you're asking about, but this question of appropriation and who has the right to do what has continued to be a really relevant question, right? People want to do things and do things correctly, or people feel that things are done incorrectly and that there's a stakes in that. So I think I understand the question, but it's a little complicated. So I was just talking about this book with some folks at LaGuardia Community College, and they asked, how would you update the book? How is it not relevant for now? And I thought that was a great question. And on the one hand, I was talking about the second part of the title, South Asian Americans, Blackness, and a Global Race Consciousness. I didn't want to say a global Black consciousness because I wanted it to be more expansive and not put the burden on Blackness and to also to be specific about what South Asians were doing. They were not adopting a Black racial consciousness. They learned from Black artists and learned about from Black friends and learned from Black genres of music, but they were themselves, except for one exception, not considering themselves to be Black. And so it was a way to learn from Black artists and politics in order to articulate a brown identity, right? And so a global race consciousness. What would be more tricky in this day with the conversations people are having is, on the one hand, this question of amplifying Black and Indigenous voices and where Asian Americans should be on that. And the second part is who can speak for what? I've told you I'm not Black and I'm not Native Hawaiian, and yet I wrote a book on Black and Native Hawaiian relations, right? And then three, I lost my train of thought. So the three would be this question of Blackness as an expansive political category of an orientation to the world, not an embodied being of African descent. And that's very tricky for, I think, a non-Black scholar to talk about these days, particularly because there's these ideas about the specificity of anti-Black racism and violence, right? State-sanctioned and lynch mob violence that disproportionately shortens the life of people of African descent. So that specificity is really important, rather than a generalized Black consciousness that a brown kid could have who sort of understands, right, and critiques US imperialism and racism. Yeah, I'm kind of going off. Okay, so where does it go? This is how I feel, and this is an old school answer that some of you are not gonna like. And it comes from Vijay Prashad and Robin Kelly from years ago, who talk about polyculturalism. And I don't mean do away with this idea of with certain cultures belonging to certain people, okay? For me, it always is about your orientation and your worldview and your politics. Like, I don't need to be in a room full of South Asians. I need to be in a room full of progressive people, like for real. And that doesn't mean like I don't see your race. Race is constitutive of that. But that's who I rather spend time with. My people are people who share similar political ideologies. Now, the thing with something like hip hop, it is an African-American cultural production. But the question of ownership is not one that I mean, who am I, right? But it's not one that I advance, because hip hop itself is a diasporic production of people from across the diaspora, including Puerto Ricans, right? From the Caribbean, from West Africa. All the merging of these practices created hip hop, which is forged in the white supremacist US nation. And so what I'm saying is that there's no pure origin. So just like if I saw, maybe if I saw a white person walking around in a sari, would I be annoyed? I mean, it's not equivalent, but for me, the question of appropriation is never quite on the mark, because to me it is this, and I talk about this in it, it's really about your approach to the thing. So a lot of the artists that I spent time with, right, they approached it not through kind of a problematic, totally racist form of adoption of trying to be embody Black masculinity at the UC Berkeley campus. A ton of Indian students were doing that, and that is problematic. It advances anti-Black racism, the model minority myth. It allows South Asians to act Black but not be Black. The artists that I studied spent time in Black neighborhoods. They lived in Black neighborhoods with Black people. They produced Black music, right, as brown people. And so the difference is that they approach it with knowledge, respect, and dedication. And that goes back to reading a book, like reading things, being, doing your homework. So again, I do want to think about maybe not so much ownership, but what is your political orientation to the thing? And so that's why, like, there's this meme that I show, or this image where it's right before Halloween, and you tell all your students, are you thinking of dressing up in blackface? And, there's not like a yes or no, there's just a don't do it. Like, just don't do it, right? So that's what I would say. Oh, can't hear you.
Sorry. This maybe is a good segue to thinking about like appropriation or ownership really become big deals when you're thinking about money and music. So like who is selling what and who is making a profit off of it. But this is also different than thinking about music for political functions. So B, do you want to ask your question out loud, or should I just read it out?
Go B, let's see you, B. I want to see your face. No.
Hi, can you see me? Hi. But no, I kind of really liked that beginning song, and that the idea of, like, people being able to use hip hop as a political voice. So I was just wondering if in Hawaii, the sovereignty movement, if they found a political voice by using hip hop or reggae, as I believe that that builds unity as well.
Yeah. Yes. So I was saying that reggae was sort of the soundtrack to the islands, but it's very interesting. So I kind of mentioned the tensions, and I don't want to overstate them, but they are emerging recently, and they're disappointing and troubling, but also understandable, between sort of the prioritization of Hawaiian sovereignty movements and then the Black Lives Matter rallies against police brutality. So similarly, there's kind of interesting thing where Black people, as I said, are sort of an absent presence. People don't even think about including Black folks in any studies of Hawaii or in any statistics of any news stories. Black folks are just not part of the statistics. Whereas in the United States, right, the continental US, when we talk about a racial analysis of anything, voters or incarceration or healthcare, it's going to be white and Black, and then maybe Latino, and usually not Asian, right? And so there's also this present absence of Black folks in Hawaii, and that is the irony that that Black musical forms have really informed the islands, and yet it's kind of divorced from its political and global sources. So Bob Marley is incredibly popular in Hawaii. He ended a tour in the Hawaiian Islands in Oahu at Shell, Waikiki Shell. But a lot of people like his love, the more the love songs rather than sort of the decolonial songs. The other thing is that reggae, hip hop too, is very common as it is globally among people in Hawaii. And people in Hawaii include Asian folks, Hawaiians, Samoans, Micronesians, Filipinos, Haole or white. But there's sort of this uncritical adoption of decontextualized Black popular culture because it doesn't emerge from a local Black community, right? People are growing up adopting hip hop through the airwaves and through Yo MTV raps, and I'm talking from the 80s. So very decontextualized, very mediated through mainstream images of problematic Blackness, without being able to see how Black friends and community members are living as racialized Black people. That said, hip hop has also been part of the sovereignty movement. So there's a number of hip hop artists who are also Hawaiian activists. And so Sudden Rush is an all Hawaiian group, and they have an album and they rap in Hawaiian, and they are rapping for sovereignty, Hawaiian sovereignty. And that's not to say that some of the members of the band didn't have problematic notions of Black masculinity, So you have these kind of interesting tensions. But rap music, hip hop music has been a really important voice for people in Hawaii. A Filipino rapper named Crystallize raps about things, and Punahele is a really active Hawaiian rapper who is active in the sovereignty movement and what's going on Mauna Kea. But what I'm saying is that there's less introspective analysis of the fact that it's a Black American cultural form, and what is the context of Black people who produce it. I hope I answered your question, B.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I wanted to pick up on something in your answer, Nitasha, where you talked about the love songs being more popular than the political or decolonial songs. And this might be a segue to a question posed by Sonia Gomez in the chat. And I'll allow them to speak this out loud if they want. But this has to do with thinking about how music might have things to do with gender desire, sexuality, et cetera, which is political, but maybe is not thought of that way at the top level. So Sonia, if you're still in the chat area, would you like to deliver your question? Let me just double check.
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool, okay.
Hi, Nitasha.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, hi.
I'm trying to remember my question. Okay, so earlier in your talk, you mentioned that many of the folks that you interviewed, those particular Afro-Asian descent had Black fathers and Asian mothers. And so I wanted to ask if you see, or if they, brought it up, this kind of idea of a gendered Black Orientalism at play in these relationships. I know that you mentioned a lot of the fathers weren't around. So I'm really interested in the relationships between the parents.
Yeah, so thank you, Sonia, so much. I miss you dearly. So that Sonia, right? The one that I know?
Yes.
There's a box on my screen. Okay, so, so the Black Asians that I talked to and spent time with in Hawaii, a lot of them were local. So they were Black Korean raised by their Korean mom who was from Korea, Black Japanese, Black Okinawan. And the thing is, they were not raised by their fathers, or their parents had divorced and split. So the other thing is, the only parents who stayed together of the locals that I met who were parents who were both Black parents. I don't know if that makes sense. So everybody else, the 14 of the 19, all their parents divorced, or they had never met their fathers, or they had spent time with their fathers when their dads moved back to Washington, D.C. or Chicago, and that's where they spent time with them. So the relationship between their parents was not framed through Afro-Orientalism, because I didn't talk to the fathers, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. It was more, I'll tell you, the more pressing issue for these Black locals was, what does it mean to grow up being Black and Korean, raised by a Korean mom from Korea who chose to stay in Hawaii because it was like Asia adjacent, where you could get Korean food, maybe speak in Korean, maybe meet other Asian people, but was not Asia where you were raising your Black children, and they would face really hostile anti-Black racism as results of the war. So the relationship was really, of these children who were growing up, was really questions about their Blackness. And as it was for all the mixed race Black locals who had an ambivalent relationship to Blackness, their relationship to their father was that they would go to their father's homes, like I said, in DC or California or Chicago, and be shocked to just be accepted as Black, like just off the bat by all their cousins, even if they were the quote exotic Hawaiian cousins. With regard to their moms and growing up in Hawaii, there is an ambivalence toward identifying as Black, even though people presume they were Black. So for instance, a girl who was Black and Asian would go to Korean grocery store and knew all the Korean food and was very familiar with it, but they thought that her mom had adopted her. So this question of like feeling like but not looking like came up a lot among Black Samoans who felt Samoan. And who weren't anti-Black, they just didn't know what it meant. So again, the relationships between the family, the parents, it's not so much that I got to an Afro-Orientalist notion of these Black soldiers who met and married Asian women and then they divorced. It's more that the children were raised in the absence of a Black family, and had to figure out what Blackness meant in the context of Hawaii, where Blackness means military. So that's going at length, but that's
Thank
where.
you.
Okay, thank you, Sonia.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, which I want to make sure we get in, and then we'll wrap things up. Thanks so much, Nitasha.
Love it.
Sakshi, would you like to deliver your question, please?
Hi. So, I was just thinking, like, just speaking to like the popular like societal kind of presentation of hip hop that you mentioned earlier, like the sort of like problematic Black masculinity. Did you think that maybe Desi like musicians and artists would gravitate towards the genre, partly to kind of like shed some of the stereotypes? I was thinking especially like sexuality wise, like there's this weird binary where it's to some people it's considered like it's like a desexed, like conservative kind of culture, and then to some people it's like it's viewed as like it's very like hypersexualized, like I'm a sit there blah 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 sort of perspective on it, depending on who you talk to. So like, do you think like it's about kind of taking ownership and like rebelling kind of sometimes?
That's such a great question. Thank you so much. So again, like to put Hip Hop Desis in context, remember folks, like it was like 25 years, was it 20? It was like 20 to 10 years ago. So hip hop, hip hop, I would say that hip hop was not as multivalent or diverse as it is today. Does that make sense? Like there was sort of like underground hip hop or self-produced music or conscious music, and then there was like the mainstream, that like NWA and things like that. So again, I do want to put this in context of time, and you're spot on. Yes, so I don't want to overemphasize the liberatory and anti-racist potential, the liberatory anti-racist reality of South Asian American hip hop artists, where like it's not all unproblematic and completely conscious and totally woke, right? Some of it is problematic. And so some of the folks in spending time with them, the men especially, would say, not everyone, but would say that it was a way to access a racialized masculinity. Absolutely. And a lot of that was either through friends, but also through images of Black masculinity that are historically imbued this nation and that is on the news and stuff, but also through early hip hop videos. So it was sort of, for a lot of these male artists who were rappers or who became MCs, et cetera, it was the notion of Black masculinity as something that they wanted to emulate because there were not models of South Asian racialized masculinity that was available to them in the ways that made sense to them, right? What I think is really interesting too, though, it's actually also a lot of those Desi women who felt drawn to hip hop, not necessarily as sort of the binaries of women in early rap, which was sort of like, questioning their sexuality as queer or as sort of the video vixen, hypersexualized brown woman. It was actually also Black masculinity that drew them, not so much that they wanted to be by Black masculine men around them, but that in some cases they wanted to be and access a form of Black masculinity themselves. So some artists said that hip hop offered them kind of gendered expressions and expressions of gender that they didn't find within their own like hegemonic Desi expectations of the proper Indian girl. So that does happen, but I think it's important not to just cancel folks out if there's one part that is problematic, right? You know what I mean? Like, I think that we're really complicated people, and so we, meaning humans, and so, but I think your question really taps into what is some of the initial kind of drive to motivate one's approach to hip hop. The part that's different, I would say, is that this became a lifelong endeavor to a lot of people. So it's about much more than sort of, I want to emulate a form of Black masculinity. It was really about a lifestyle that some of them are still producing music today, Thank you.
Everybody, a round of applause for our guest, Professor Nitasha Sharma. And
Thank you. No, I'm clapping you all, and especially East Wind Books, and especially Andrew's English 53, what? And Andrew Leong. Thank you all.
Okay, I want to make sure that we turn things over to East Wind Books, who will have some concluding announcements and send us off. So who is switching on for East Wind?
Here. I just want to thank Nitasha and Andrew for participating in this very enlightening event. And I also want to thank two East Wind staffers for being part of the planning, Kat Sin and B Dong. The books are available for purchase at East Wind Books website, www.asiabookcenter.com. You can have it mailed to you, or you could come by for pickup at the front door.
Bachilochu avirite mototochu badanekaite ukarib natirevano
Badanekaite America marevado Navai like a chain Darmani yadne Tori tupine Lagan karis koni sate
Mare piuche to piva de anabupani
To jabal marudil To resechi
Yo, Maru real, my heart, Maru loy, my blood from the start. Maru not, my family, two worlds apart. How do I move on, babe? Cause no matter where I go, my soul is in the same
Maru
place.
real, my heart Maru loy, my blood from the start Mari not, my family, two worlds apart
How do I move on, babe?
Cause no matter where I go, my soul is in the same place.
Dear bro, it's been a long time since we talked. 4 years since I stepped on that plane, house mom and pops. As for me, I'm working hard, learning the ropes of the game. I went from a nobody to lots of fortune and some fame. In my own eyes, I think I'm doing really well. Got lots of money, so tell nobody to worry about my wealth. As for my health, well, it could be a little better, but take care of yourself. Love your bro, I'll storm through this weather.
Maro pai, wane lage cheke tane bo fave che saro to jivan jivo. Panzabe ke vi lage che mami ne papa ne yadave cheke buli gayo. Emni tabe bagre che jare tu pai sar pachar pari gayo, hari gayo. Ajingi ave che ne jai che saro to maro pai tumaro dai. Chu tumaro pai, lu tumaro dil. Chu seni mate averi te jivan jivo.
Maru real, my heart, Maru loy, my blood from the start. Mari not, my family, two worlds apart. How do I move on, babe? Cause no matter where I go, my soul is in the same
Maru
place.
real, my heart, Maru loy, my blood from the start. Mari not, my family, two worlds apart.
How do I move on, babe?
Cause no matter where I go, my soul is in the same place.
Hello, my brother, how are you?
Pai kemche.
You like my new suit, just got it tailored. Sergio Valente.
Hamari vomina ne apri baby shivani. Mesija kasuka cha nasto ke pani.
Here's a gift for your wife, a baby doll for your girl. I can't wait till it's my turn to bring a new life into this world. There's no time for all that, and I refuse to do a bio data.
Family joy chip and lage cheke mali gayu tune tara paisa. Daru lagan tag.
Let it go, let it flow. I already know where I stand, what I have, my 2 hands, my 1 life, and my fam.
Ava kariche ke tu kali kali boru.
Why do you keep on asking me this? You know that you know it's true.
Evuche
I guess that's it.
ave u America George.
No, I would never let you go what I've gone through.